All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating story of James Simons. If you've ever wondered how a mathematician with literally zero traditional finance background managed to build the most successful hedge fund in history, well, you're in the exact right place. We're going to break down the precise methodology that allowed a total outsider to completely reinvent investing from the ground up, and what his approach teaches us about the true power of data. Let's get right to it.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this number is simply staggering. 66. For 30 straight years, from 1988 all the way to 2018, Renaissance Technologies' flagship medallion fund generated an average annual gross return of 66%. I mean, just to put that into perspective for a second, the S&P 500 has historically returned about 10% annually over the long term. This wasn't just some lucky streak during a raging bull market either. This was a consistent, completely dominant outperformance across 3 decades. We're talking through the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, the whole shebang. Now, you might be thinking, sure, but what about after fees? Well, the net return was still an incredible 39% annually. And actually, here's what makes that figure even more mind-blowing. Renaissance charged some of the absolute highest fees in the entire industry. We're talking a reported 5% management fee and a massive 44% performance fee. Yet even after taking that giant slice of the pie, the 39% net return investors walked away with nearly doubled Warren Buffett's historical average of roughly 20%. Investors gladly paid those astronomical fees because, frankly, the returns were unmatched by anything else on Wall Street. So this brings us to the central mystery of our explainer. How exactly did James Simons pull this off? How did someone who spent the early part of his career literally breaking codes for the National Security Agency manage to completely break Wall Street? Especially a guy who readily admitted his early trading experiments relied on feel and were incredibly inconsistent. How does a complete outsider beat the greatest investors in the world at their own game? To answer that, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The code-breaking mathematician, 2. Intuition versus models, 3. The pure system, and finally, 4. The quant king's legacy. Let's start with Section 1, the code-breaking mathematician. To really grasp his method, we have to understand the man himself and his unique cognitive skill set. See, James Harris Simons wasn't born into finance. He was born into pure, unadulterated mathematics. Let's move to and see how this builds, because his timeline paints a picture of true academic brilliance. Simons entered MIT when he was just 14 years old, snacking his bachelor's in math by 1958. By 1961, at the incredibly young age of 23, he had already knocked out his PhD in mathematics at UC Berkeley. The guy was teaching at Harvard and MIT by his late 20s. But his career took a sharp, really fascinating turn during the 1960s when he joined the NSA as a codebreaker. Later on, in 1978, he founded Monometrics, which would eventually evolve into the legendary Renaissance Technologies. And this brings us right to the crux of his genius, that cryptographer's mindset. Over at the NSA, Simons' entire job was to extract meaningful signals from noisy, complex, highly encrypted communications under extreme pressure. You see, a cryptographer believes that encrypted messages contain structured, decodable information, no matter how chaotic or randomly look on the surface. Simons took this exact premise and essentially copy-pasted it onto financial markets. He realized, hey, price movements aren't perfectly efficient. They aren't entirely random. Beneath the surface-level chaos of the market, there are hidden, exploitable statistical regularities just waiting to be discovered, as long as you have the right mathematical tools. Which leads us to Section 2, Intuition versus Model Trading. This epiphany created a massive philosophical divide between Simons and the rest of the financial establishment. He realized the traditional methods were totally flawed, and he completely inverted the whole approach to investing. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this stark contrast between these two philosophies. On the one hand, you've got the traditional intuition trader. This is your classic Wall Street setup, relying on a great investor who synthesizes the news, trusts their gut, and makes real-time judgment calls. But Simons knew human cognition is actually terrible for the statistical demands of modern markets. We get emotionally biased, we get overconfident, we panic. On the flip side, you have the model trader. This Renaissance approach relies on automated rules, data-backed patterns, and processing massive, massive data sets. It completely eliminates emotional interference from the equation. So to actually execute this, Simons had to build a fundamentally different type of organization. Traditional Wall Street firms were busy hiring MBAs, finance pros, and economists who leaned on financial statements and insider industry networks to make their calls. Simons? He completely rejected that orthodoxy. Renaissance Technologies went out and hired mathematicians, physicists, statisticians, computer scientists, and cryptographers. In fact, he famously avoided hiring people with finance backgrounds altogether because he believed their training just introduced bad biases. His philosophy was simple and brilliant. Hire the best scientists in the world and teach them finance, not the other way around. All right, jumping into section 3, the peer system. So what did this army of brilliant scientists actually build behind closed doors? They built the mechanical engine of Renaissance Technologies, and how it operates is just incredible. The pure system rests on 4 absolutely crucial pillars. First up, pattern mining at an unprecedented scale. They ingest enormous volumes of historical and alternative data just to hunt down statistical anomalies. Second, and this is a big one, predictive algorithms over human discretion. Once a model is built, human traders are absolutely never allowed to override the computer. The system executes automatically so that human emotion never, ever compromises the math. Third, they diversify across thousands of signals. And fourth, continuous model refinement. They know that as markets evolve, old patterns decay, so they have to constantly hunt for new ones before their competitors catch on. Let's really zero in on that third pillar for a second, because it's essentially the secret sauce of their risk management, statistical diversification. Renaissance wasn't out there looking for one massive home run fundamental play, like trying to predict the next Apple or Amazon. Instead, their whole approach is about spreading risk across thousands of small, uncorrelated bets. Every single trading signal might only give them a tiny microscopic edge, but when you aggregate thousands of those tiny edges across multiple instruments and time horizons, those tiny fractions of a percent compound into massive, highly consistent returns. It's like a casino. They just need the house edge to play out over time. But there was a catch to all of this. A mathematical edge is super fragile. If you pump way too much capital into a specific strategy, those large positions will actually start moving the market, which completely erodes the very inefficiencies your algorithm is trying to exploit in the first place. So, back in 1993, Simons made a strategically brilliant move. He completely closed the Medallion Fund to outside investors. From that day forward, it was exclusively reserved for Renaissance employees. This guaranteed the fund's asset size wouldn't bloat and ruin its performance, and it created this incredibly intense culture of secrecy. The people benefiting from the models were the exact same people building them. And that leads us to our final part, Section 4, the Quant King's Legacy. Because this unprecedented level of success permanently altered the landscape of global finance, and its impact extends way beyond just making billions of dollars. Over time, Simons rightfully earns the title of the Quant King because he achieved a profound shift in how we even think about finance. Before him, the dominant view was that if you wanted superior investing results, you needed superior human judgment and better sources. Simons proved that markets are fundamentally a data problem, not a judgment problem, a data problem. He showed the entire world that superior data processing and cold systematic execution could consistently outsmart the greatest human minds Wall Street had to offer. And because he proved that, he essentially birthed the modern quantitative hedge fund industry. Today, you've got massive firms managing hundreds of billions of dollars globally, names like 2 Sigma, D.E. Shaw, and AQR, and may trace their intellectual lineage directly back to the paradigm that Simons pioneered. But equally important is what he actually did with his wealth. Through the Simons Foundation, which he set up in 1994, he donated billions of dollars to basic science, theoretical math, physics, and autism research. The mathematician who left academia to conquer Wall Street turned around and used his ultimate success to fund breakthroughs in the pure sciences that had shaped his mind in the very beginning. So, the crucial point is captured perfectly in this quote from Simons himself. We're not trying to understand why things happen. We're just trying to find patterns that repeat. I mean, that is the ultimate distillation of his purely empirical approach. Think about it. A traditional investor needs a narrative. They have to know why a stock is moving. Simons? He couldn't care less about the why. He only cared that the data proved the pattern existed with statistical confidence. He literally transformed trading from a subjective, interpretive art into a cold, empirical, data-driven science. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to ponder. Simons proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that removing human emotion and relying entirely on data was the ultimate key to unlocking historic returns. So, as we look ahead to a future that is increasingly governed by artificial intelligence and massive data sets across basically every industry, in a world fundamentally driven by data, is human intuition still an asset, or is it just a liability? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the patterns around you, and I'll see you next time.